Very warm greetings, everyone. So this is in continuation of the lecture series of Fundamental of Climate Change and Economics. This is part 3. The learning objectives of this particular lecture would be to comprehend difference between adaptive measures and preventive measures, to understand various environmental tools or regulations, to know climate adaptation needs by different sectors, and to understand climate mitigation policies such as carbon tax. In this first half of the lecture, adaptive measures. Now, there are several aspects of adaptive measures which help us to cope up the environmental challenge, climate change challenge. Construction of dikes and sea walls to protect against the rising sea and extreme weather events such as floods and hurricane. The other way adaptive measure could be shifting of cultivation patterns in agriculture sector to adapt the changing weather conditions due to global warming. Other would be creating institutions that can mobilize needed human, material and financial resources to respond to climate-related disasters. These are various adaptive measures to combat climate change. The other side of the measures are the preventive measures one can visualize. Under preventive measures, there are several ways. First is reducing emissions of greenhouse gases by meeting energy demand from sources with the lower GHG emissions, such as switching from coal to wind energy or renewable energy. The other way is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by increasing energy efficiency, enhancing natural carbon sinks. Now, what are natural carbon sinks? These are portions of the ecosystem with the capacity and the ability to absorb certain quantities of carbon dioxide, including these are forests, oceans. So, these areas where the carbon may be stored are considered as natural sinks. They include soils, forests, etc. So, if you expand and enhance the area of these natural entities, you are contributing to preventive measures. Human intervention can either reduce or expand these sinks through forest management and agriculture practices. The other way is forests recycle and carbon dioxide emissions into oxygen. So, forest cover is a very important aspect of preventive measures. Preserving forest areas, expanding reforestation, and they can have a significant effect of carbon dioxide emissions. Soils are also vast carbon repositories with 3 times, and they are considered to have 3 times more carbon storage in soil than in the atmosphere. So, restoring the degraded soils could capture large quantity of carbon dioxide emissions. Now, this was all regarding the preventive measures, overview of preventive measures. Now, let us see what is the need for adaptive measures that can be visualized for each sector. For example, if we talk about water, then what are the adaptive measures or strategies one can visualize? Expand water storage can be one of the aspect, improve the water quality and mitigating the contamination in the water. The other is the agriculture sector. Adjust the by developing various methods to enhance the productivity, then strategies to because of changing pattern because of temperature, you can adjust your crop accordingly by changing the timing of the crop and other ways. As far as infrastructure is concerned, you can have an adaptive measures of relocating the infrastructure in most of the coastal areas, then moving towards creating the resilience factor where even the entire establishment is relocated, and create and restore the wetlands because of the flood problem. Then human health also, they get the heat waves, and then they are warned. If they are warned at the right time, they can take preventive measures to combat this problem of climate change. Similarly, in case of transport also, you can design certain ways in which relocation of road facility and the flight facility and airways can also be adapted. And as far as the energy is concerned, you strengthen the distribution aspect, where you can go from centralized to decentralized method and move from the conventional form of energy to the renewable form of energy, or increase energy efficiency in various appliances, etc. Ecosystems can also have an adaptive measures, where you can create certain ecosystems which are more climate resilient, and enhance monitoring and government supported systems where deforestation is taken care of, mangroves are enhanced, and these are various steps one can take. Now, as far as environmental regulations are concerned, we have two broad categories of tools or environmental measures or regulative measures. On one side, we have command and control policies. On the other side, it is market-based instruments. So, under command and control policies, emissions are to limit and control emissions is one way. The other way is to formulate equipments which are reducing the emissions. Another is to target the stationary sources like water, air, only air, and air and water together. So these are certain stationary sources where you can easily, and sometimes you will face monitoring the problem of non-stationary, or the example transport. So those sources have to be located, and the control of emissions have to be implemented by government. So this is command and control, where the targets are set up by the government, and it is for the top-down approach. On the other hand, the other way is the market-based instruments. Market-based instruments are of different types. They are controlled by the market, and they are floated in the market, with the prices of the systems, permits and per unit prices are decided by the market. For example, tradable permits is one of the example of market-based instrument. Here also pollution is controlled, emissions are controlled. The other alternative for market base is switching over to the other energy source from conventional to non-conventional. As far as the environmental regulations of CEC, carbon command and control policy or market-based policy is concerned, the main motive of these regulations should be they should achieve cost effectiveness. The use of cost effectiveness analysis avoids many of the complications that are usually associated with cost-benefit analysis. So the purpose of introducing environmental regulation policies is mainly to reduce cost and become more cost-effective while tackling the problem. Now, market-oriented approach is considered to be the most cost-effective. Rather than attempting to control the market actors directly, they shift the incentive so that individuals and the firms will change their behavior to take external costs and benefits into account. Example of market-based policy are pollution taxes, transferable and tradable permits, which are practically applied at a very large scale in the current world. Both of these are potentially useful for controlling, they very important, significant tools for controlling the GHG's gas emissions. Other relevant economic policies include measures to create incentives, are adoption of the renewable energy sources, that is shifting from conventional to renewable, and then energy efficient technologies. It is evident that mitigation policies, they need to be supplemented by the adaptive policies. One cannot rely only on one type of policy. So if you're heading towards low carbon emissions and you're heading towards the target of reducing carbon emissions, one should have a mix of policies. On one side, you should try for implementing the mitigating policies through environmental regulation tools. On the other side, the adaptive policies are equally important. Even if significant mitigating policies are implemented in the immediate future, like warning and sea level rise, etc., they should continue well into the future also, even because such kind of environmental disruptions are expected in the future, even in the century. However, the ability to institute adaptive measure varies across world, because some countries are heading toward, they are already developed, and the others are less developed and developing. It is the world's poorest of the countries who face the greatest need to adapt to the policies, to the climate change. But at the same time, they lack resources, adequate resources to implement such policies, which can either be adaptive or it can be precautionary or preventive or even mitigating. So, climate change mitigating policies are regarding the release of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is to reduce this greenhouse gas is considered as a negative externality, and that imposes a significant cost to the entire world. The current market for carbon-based fuel, for example, are coal, oil, natural gas. They are considered into account only by the private. When you talk about them, we have the private prices or the cost associated with these kind of resources, and the equilibrium does not reflect the social cost, social optimum. So that is why, to combat this problem of externality, where the private prices and the quantities are not reflecting the social cost and quantities, incorporating the environmental cost or the externality cost, one needs to take into account the carbon tax. Now, I'm just right now putting the example of case of carbon tax. One can see there are several instruments of market-based instruments which can be implemented, but first let us understand how a carbon tax will come into the picture and have an effect on the carbon emissions and the quantities and the prices of emissions. The standard economic remedy for internalizing the external cost is per unit tax on the pollutant. So the best way is to put a price on per unit emission, or put a price means put a tax on per unit emission or a pollutant. In this case, this is called as carbon tax, a per unit tax on goods and services based on the quantity of carbon dioxide emitted during the production and consumption process. It is levied on carbon-based fossil fuels in proportion to the amount of carbon associated with the production and use. So, it is basically the carbon-based fossil fuels which are at the same time associated with carbon emission through the process of production and consumption. So, in the economic terms, the level of such a tax should be based on social cost of carbon, an estimate of the financial cost of carbon emissions per unit, including both present and the future cost. So, this is a reflective of a lot of things. Carbon tax is just not a simple tax. It reflects externality, social cost, and the future and present and the future costs also, the damages which are which we can visualize in future. Carbon tax conversion. Now, how to use this carbon tax to can be implemented? There are certain little calculations involved in it. Carbon tax is suppose carbon has a, now it is a well-known fact that carbon has a molecular weight of 12. With carbon dioxide molecular weight is 44 to account for this tax. Now, suppose you impose a tax of around 100, then you will multiply with the ratio 12 by 44 and you get the value as it is there on the screen. Similarly, if you tax $35 per ton of the carbon dioxide, then you would multiply 44 by 12 and you get a ratio, you multiply with that dollar and then you get the value of the tax. Now this $100, $35 will be equivalent to the calculation to 128 per ton of carbon. So if you can, there are two ways of taxing carbon. Either you put a tax or amount on the carbon itself, or you put a tax or a dollar or an amount on carbon dioxide. So one can choose any of the method. As far as the alternative carbon taxes are concerned, on the alternative various fossil fuels or various versions, so impact on carbon tax on the prices of different fuels will differ. For example, if we take the gasoline, gasoline is one of the fossil fuel, and if you tax gasoline, carbon tax is imposed of $50 gasoline, then how much is the proportion or the percentage of increase in the price of gasoline? You can see on your screens that it's around 20.5% increase you will experience in case of the price of the gasoline. But if you take if you choose coal as one of the version or one of the particular type of fossil fuel and you impose a carbon tax, then the percentage rise in prices is to 62.5%. And in case of natural gas, the rise is 22.2%. So this is how the calculation goes with the impact of carbon tax. Suppose we pick up gasoline price. 1 gallon of gasoline is equal to 8.8 around 8.8 kg of carbon dioxide emission. So it can be converted into a carbon tax of $50 per tons. If it is imposed, then it leads to the calculations like 0.44 per gallon dollar. 0.44 per gallon, it amounts to that, and with the price of it will be $2.2, that is 20% rise in the prices will be experienced by this particular tax, which is on gasoline. Then this is all the impact of all this is because of elasticity of demand. Because carbon tax is affecting definitely the prices of the fuel, and definitely it will have an impact on the elasticity. It all depends upon the rise in the prices. The extent of rise in the prices will depend upon the elasticity of demand. Elasticity, which is given by the percentage in the quantity demanded by percentage change in the price. Studies have indicated that in short run, the elasticity estimates have been calculated from the range of minus 0.03 to minus 0.25. This means that 10% increase in the price of gasoline would be expected to decrease the gasoline demand in the short run by about minus 0.3 to minus 2.5%. So this is the extent of impact on the demand side of gasoline. In the long run, short run effect is definitely going to be different than the long term effect. In the long term, say around 5 years down the line, people are more responsive to gasoline prices increase, and as they have time to purchase different vehicles and switch to different fuel sources of energy, and they adjust their driving habits also. So the average long term elasticity of demand of motor fuels based on 51 estimates is considered to be, or is computed to be, minus 0.64. Then firstly, the revenue recycling effect, which is very important part of the entire discussion. Revenue recycling could redirect the revenue from the carbon tax and other type of environmental regulation to lower the other taxes. Much of the political opposition has been faced by the higher energy taxes, because it's a political phenomenon, because taxes are imposed by the government and definitely they will reflect the votes and for a governance system. So political aspect is involved if you impose carbon tax as it is. It's come from the perception that there would be an extra tax on the top of the existing tax, like tax on the income, property and social security taxes, and which people are already ready and they are paying. The idea of increasing the taxes on economic bads such as pollution while reducing the taxes on the other varieties of taxes, we want to encourage the fact that the final collection of the taxes remain same. So revenue neutral tax shift, the total amount that citizens finally have to pay to the government in form of taxes, is essentially unchanged. So that is the idea of revenue. Some of the revenue that could also be used to provide relief for low income people, offset the burden of the higher energy costs. And if such a revenue neutral taxes are generated, the individuals, the business people who are operating and they are more energy efficient, they will try to be more energy efficient, they will try to save money, overall money expenditure. So this was all about the market-based carbon tax. Now there are other types of regulations as far as the market-based regulations are concerned, which we are going to talk soon in the next. Thank you so much.